She had 30 seconds to decide if she was going to die in this room or walk out of it. The money was already in her bag. The safe was already closed. The door was right there, 10 steps, maybe 12. And outside that door was a car, a city, a life she was still trying to build stitch by stitch, sketch by sketch, one unbearable night at a time. She took the first step. Then the light came on. Kai was sitting in the chair across the room. Not standing, not reaching for anything, just sitting, with the particular stillness of a man who has never once needed to rush to make something happen. He looked at her the way you look at something you already understand completely. Then he pressed a button on the side table. One button. The main door opened. A side door she hadn't noticed opened. The bathroom door behind her opened. Men filled the room from every direction, and the space that had felt manageable a moment ago suddenly had no air in it at all. And Cynthia, who had survived 29 years on instinct and nerve and a refusal to let anyone see her sweat, felt her legs go before her mind gave them permission. She hit the floor on both knees. She had never begged for anything in her life. But she begged now. She begged with everything she had because her body understood what her pride hadn't yet accepted, that the only currency she had left in this room was the truth of how badly she wanted to live. And the most terrifying thing? He let her finish. He waited until her voice broke and her hands shook and there was nothing left of the composed woman who had walked in the night before. Then he crouched down to her level, leaned close, and whispered something in her ear that she would spend the next 4 months trying to forget. He told his driver to take her home, and she thought that was the end of it. She had no idea it was the beginning. A quick disclaimer, my loves. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, events, and scenarios are products of creative storytelling and are not based on real people or events. This content is not copied, stolen, or plagiarized from any source. Welcome to Stories from Soul, the channel where every story will leave you breathless, keep you guessing, and make you feel everything in between. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this is not the kind of story you want to walk into halfway. And if you have been here before, you already know what we do. Let us get into it. The driver did not speak the entire ride home. He just drove, eyes forward, hands steady, the kind of man who had learned that the less he knew, the longer he lived. Cynthia sat in the back seat with her bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of it, like she was riding to church. She did not move. She did not look out the window. She just breathed, slowly and deliberately, the way she had taught herself to breathe in the moments after something nearly killed her. She had nearly been killed before. Not like this. Not in a room full of men who carried the kind of silence that only comes from having done things they will never be asked about. Not with a weapon against her head held by someone who was not even angry. Someone who was simply willing. That was the difference between the dangers she had navigated before and the danger she had just walked out of. The men she had dealt with before felt something. Jean felt nothing. And a man who feels nothing when he raises a weapon is a different category of problem entirely. She got home just before 5 in the morning. The building elevator stuck on the 3rd floor the way it always did. She took the stairs, unlocked her door, stepped inside, and stood in the middle of her apartment without turning the light on for a full 2 minutes. Then she looked at the wall. The sketches were still there. The fabric swatches pinned in color families. Deep burgundy next to burnt orange next to a cream that she had spent 3 weeks trying to find the exact right shade of. The brand name written in 3 different fonts with 2 of them crossed out. The supplier contacts. The production timeline she had mapped on a strip of brown paper that ran from one end of the wall to the other. The post-it above her desk with a date written on it, and one word underneath. Launch. 18 months away. Possibly less if she was disciplined. Possibly more if something went wrong. She opened the floorboard, put the money in the box, labeled it with a date and an amount the way she labeled every deposit. Not like stolen money, like a business expense, closed it, and went to sleep. She did not think about the whisper. She refused to think about the whisper. But here is the thing about words spoken close enough to your ear that you feel the breath behind them. They do not wait for permission to replay. He had said, if you want to live, never tell anyone you saw that safe. Not a threat. Not exactly. More like the opening clause of a contract. And Cynthia, who had studied accounting for 3 years at a state university in Georgia before life redirected her in ways she never planned for, understood contracts. She understood that this one had terms she had not fully read yet. She understood that the penalty clause existed whether or not she ever found it in writing. And she understood, in the way you understand things you would rather not, that the man who had just let her walk out of that room had done so for a reason that had nothing to do with mercy. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke up, Mira was knocking. Not the knock of someone who does not know if they are welcome. The knock of someone who already knows the answer and just wants the door to move. Mira had been knocking like that since they were 19 years old, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, Georgia, that had a broken heater and a landlord who communicated exclusively through notes slipped under the door. Cynthia opened it. Mira came in with food in one hand and her shoes already half off before she cleared the threshold, the same way she always did, and set everything on the counter without being asked. They sat on the floor because the couch had fabric samples on it that Cynthia had not moved in 3 days. They ate without turning the television on. Just talked. The kind of talking that does not need to be interesting because the company makes it enough. Mira had grown up 2 streets away from Cynthia in a neighborhood in Atlanta where ambition was either crushed early or it made you bulletproof. They had chosen bulletproof. They had chosen it together, which made the difference. They had moved to Seoul 4 years ago chasing an opportunity that Myra's cousin had told them about. The kind of opportunity that sounds too specific to be a scam, but too good to be completely real, and it had turned out to be somewhere exactly in between. Mira had pivoted into event coordination. She was good at it, genuinely, naturally good at managing chaos and people and the gap between what a client said they wanted and what they actually needed. Cynthia had pivoted into something she did not name out loud at family dinners back home in Georgia. But Mira had never once made her feel like less. Not once in 4 years. Not once in all the mornings that Cynthia came home looking like she had survived something and needed the floor and some food and someone who was not going to ask questions she could not answer cleanly. Mira just showed up. Every time, without announcement, with food and the particular warmth of someone who has decided that loving you is not conditional on understanding you. That was her specific brand of devotion. She just kept showing up, no matter what, and she made it look effortless the way only people who have practiced it for years can. Mira picked up the sketchbook from the desk without asking because she was allowed. She turned pages slowly, the way you turn pages when you are actually looking. She stopped at a dress. High neck, open back, structured at the shoulders in a way that looked like architecture more than fashion. Like someone had decided that a woman's body deserved the same intention that goes into a building. This one, Mira said, pointing without touching the page. This one is the one. Cynthia looked at it from across the room. That is the one I am most afraid of. That is how you know, Mira said. They stayed like that for another hour. 2 black women from Atlanta sitting on the floor of a Seoul apartment with a dream pinned to the wall and enough warmth between them to make the rest of it feel survivable. Mira laughed at something. Cynthia threw a cushion at her. They argued briefly about a television show and then agreed immediately after. The way people argue when the argument is just a form of conversation. Remember this. Remember exactly how this feels. The food, the floor, the laugh, the sketch on the wall, the specific safety of being known by someone who chooses to stay. Remember it because this story is going to ask you to come back to it, and when it does, it will cost you something. Now, if you are watching this and you have not subscribed to Stories from Seoul yet, this is your moment. Hit the button right now, because what is about to happen next is the part that changes everything, and you do not want to miss a single second of it. The next evening, a black car parked outside her building. Cynthia saw it from the window and went still for a moment. Then she crossed the room and opened the door before he could knock, because she was not going to give him the satisfaction of catching her off guard twice in 2 days. Kai stood in her doorway in different clothes, no entourage, no visible security. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was not particularly interested in negotiating it. She looked at him for a long second. I do not fall in love, she said. We will have a nice time and you will pay me. That is the deal. He agreed without blinking. She let him in, and she told herself, firmly and clearly, and with the conviction of someone who has repeated a thing enough times to start believing it, that this was a business decision. She had a rule. She never saw the same client twice. It was the most important rule she had ever made for herself, the one that kept the line between her 2 lives clean and visible and uncrossable. 1 night per person. That was the architecture. That was what kept everything standing. She had just broken it. And the way she closed the door behind him, slowly, carefully, like she was trying not to disturb something she could not see, that was not the movement of a woman making a business decision. But she would not admit that for a very long time. Here is something you need to know that Cynthia does not know yet, and this changes everything that comes after it. The morning after the theft, before Cynthia had even gotten home, before she had even reached her building, Jean had made 3 phone calls. By the time she was asleep in her apartment, someone had already located her real name, not the name she worked under. Her real name, the name on her Georgia driver's license, the name her mother used when she called from Atlanta on Sunday evenings. Her full history, the university, the degree she was 3 credits short of finishing, The fashion business registration she had filed quietly 6 months ago through a small agency in Itaewon. The supplier in Busan she had emailed twice from a personal account. The factory space she had toured alone on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing sunglasses, thinking nobody was watching. Jean had a complete file on her before she finished her first cup of coffee. He said nothing to Kai. He never said anything to Kai before he was ready. That was the thing about Jean that most people understood too late, always too late. He was not reactive. He did not respond to situations. He built them. He was a man who planted things in soil that no one else was watching and then waited, with absolute patience, for the right season to arrive. He had been doing this his entire life. He was extraordinarily good at it. He kept the file. He updated it. He added to it every week. And he waited. Weeks passed. Kai kept coming back. Not loudly. There were no grand gestures, no behavior designed to impress or overwhelm. He moved through her life the way water moves through stone, not by force but by persistence, finding the available space and filling it so gradually that you only notice what has changed when you look at where you started. He was quieter than she had expected, more patient than she thought a man like him would be. He would sit at her desk sometimes while she worked on sketches and say nothing for an hour, which should have felt like an intrusion but somehow landed closer to something she did not have a word for. A presence that did not demand anything from the room it was in. She kept her wall up. She kept the transaction visible and formal because as long as it was a transaction, she was in control of it. She charged him. She kept records. She maintained the language of business around everything they did because business had rules and rules had edges, and edges meant she knew exactly where she was standing at any given moment. But walls require energy to maintain. Sustained, daily, deliberate energy. And he seemed to understand this without being told. Seemed to know, with some instinct that she resented and could not dismiss, that the longer he simply stayed without demanding anything from the wall, the more expensive it became for her to keep it standing. Then one evening, he brought a document to her apartment. A financial record, he said. Something his accountant had flagged, but could not fully explain. He mentioned her accounting background casually, the way you mention something you have known for a while, but are choosing, right now, to finally use. And she understood in that moment that he had known about her education for some time. She could have called that out. She chose not to. She looked at the document. Then she looked at it again. There was a shell company buried in the third attachment. It was structured to look like a standard operational account, the kind that processes vendor payments in small consistent amounts and draws no attention from anyone who is only looking at the surface. But the routing pattern was wrong in a way that was almost elegant. Almost, meaning someone had built it carefully, but not carefully enough for someone who knew what careful looks like from the inside. Over 18 months, at the rate it was currently moving, it would drain a significant amount from his primary holdings in a way that would register as ordinary business loss on every report anyone would ever read. She sat with it. She could close the laptop. She could say she had not found anything. Let him leave. Let whatever was building inside that document continue building. That would have been the safer choice. The cleaner choice. The choice that kept her at a distance from his world and his money and the complicated feeling of being trusted by someone she had no business being trusted by. Instead, she turned the screen toward him and showed him exactly what she had found. She walked him through it line by line. No drama, no performance, just numbers, what they meant, what the pattern indicated, what would have happened in 14 months if nobody had looked closely enough. She explained it the way she had been trained to explain things, clearly, sequentially, without making the other person feel foolish for not seeing it first. Kai looked at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at her. He had an entire accounting team. He had advisors whose only job was to find exactly this kind of thing. None of them had flagged it. She had found it in a single evening, sitting at her own kitchen table, and instead of closing the laptop, she had turned it toward him. He said 2 words. Stay here. Not tonight. Not with me. Just stay. As though the word here had been quietly redefined while neither of them was paying attention. She stayed. And something shifted in her that night that she would spend the next 3 months pretending had not happened. Because Cynthia had been very careful, for her entire adult life, never to need anything from a person she could not afford to lose. She had constructed her life around that principle. It was not coldness, it was architecture. It was what kept the wall standing and the floorboard closed and the date on the post it's still reachable. And she was starting to feel something she absolutely, definitively, could not afford. She passed the safe one evening while walking through his main office. She did not stop. She did not slow down. But the whisper came back the way it always did when she got close to it. Quiet, specific, unavoidable. If you want to live, never tell anyone you saw that safe. She knew more than what was in the safe now. She knew what funded it. She knew the accounts it protected, the names on those accounts, the structures built around those names, the history beneath those structures. She was sitting at the center of everything he had built, and he had put her there himself. And the irony of that was so complete that sometimes, in the quiet of her own apartment, it did not feel like irony at all. It felt like a sentence. But hold on, because this is the part nobody sees coming. 2 weeks after the evening with the financial document, the agency sent Cynthia a new assignment. His name was Kaloru. She walked into that evening the way she walked into all of them, composed, prepared, with the internal distance she had spent 2 years perfecting. Kaloru was Korean, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who occupied a room differently than other men, not through movement or noise, but through a quality of stillness that communicated that everything in the room had already been assessed and categorized. He drank slowly. He watched everything. Watchful men, Cynthia had learned, required different management than loud ones. Loud men gave you information constantly, without meaning to. Watchful men gave you nothing until they decided to give you everything at once. The evening moved the way these evenings moved. Then his phone lit up on the table. She saw the photo on the screen from where she was sitting. It was Kai. Her body responded before her mind could intervene. Her hand moved toward the phone the way a hand moves towards something familiar, something that belongs in your orbit, without a conscious instruction being issued. Kaloru's hand connected with the side of her face. Not frantic. Flat. Measured. The way you correct something that has gotten too close to something it should not touch. You do not go through my private phone. Cynthia's jaw tightened. She pulled everything back into place the way she always did. Quickly, completely, without letting the reorganization show on her face, and looked at him with the most level expression she owned. He looked familiar. I apologize. Please pay me so I can leave. Kaloru refilled his glass. He was not angry. He was something that Cynthia recognized as significantly more dangerous than anger. He was interested. Where do you know him from? She gave him the shortest, flattest version she could construct. He listened without interrupting, without his expression shifting, without giving her any information about what he was doing with what she was telling him. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she considered standing up and ending the evening herself. Then he said, "Sit back down." He reached for something beside him and placed it on the table. A folder. Cynthia looked at it. Then she opened it because there was no version of this moment in which not opening it made things better. Her real name. Not the name she worked under. Her real name. The one on her Georgia driver's license. The one her mother wrote on birthday cards in her looping handwriting. Her fashion business plan, printed out, annotated in someone else's handwriting in red pen, with notes in the margins that indicated someone had read it carefully enough to have opinions about it. The factory space in Busan, the address, the date she had toured it, the name of the contact she had spoken to, the supplier, the dates of her emails, sent from a personal account she had told no one about, the name of an investor she had met for coffee once, at a place she had chosen that morning on a complete impulse, 6 weeks ago. He had known before she walked in the door. He had known, possibly, before the agency had ever sent her his name. Cynthia closed the folder. Her face did not move. I am not asking you to become someone else, Kaloru said. Keep doing exactly what you are doing. Get closer. Tell me what he tells you. What you see. What you hear. What moves through those accounts. No, she said. She left. She got home and sat in the dark for a long time. The sketchbook was on the desk. The post-it was above it. The date on it had not changed. Launch. The dream she had been funding one impossible evening at a time. The thing she had moved to a city on the other side of the world to protect was sitting in a folder on a table in a room she had just walked out of. He had all of it. Every thread of it. And he had not offered it as a gift. He had laid it on the table the way you lay down a hand of cards, not to show off, but to show you that the game is already over and has been for longer than you realized. She did not sleep that night, or the night after. 3 days later, she went back to Kaloru. She told herself it was strategic. She told herself she was managing the timeline, buying space, gathering information she could use to find a way out. She told herself a number of things that were adjacent to the truth without touching it directly. The truth was simpler and worse. He had her business in that folder and he knew it, and the version of her future that still included launch required her to walk back through that door. And just like that, without a plan and without a net, Cynthia was operating inside 2 worlds simultaneously. 2 men, 2 sets of demands, 2 versions of herself. And the one at the center of both of them had no idea. If you are still watching, drop a soul in the comments right now. I want to see who is here with me because this story is about to turn in a direction that is going to make your jaw drop. Make sure you have subscribed because we are not even close to the halfway mark and it only gets more intense from here. Getting close to Kai after that was both easier and harder than it should have been. Easier because he was already letting her in. The evening with the financial document had done something that no amount of strategy or charm could have manufactured. It had made him trust her in the specific way that men who have built empires trust almost nobody. Not with sentiment. With the machinery. She sat in on conversations she was not introduced at, simply present, simply quiet, in the way that his silence on her presence communicated everything his words did not. She was introduced to men who did not ask questions because in this world, questions about a person that Kai had chosen to keep close were not questions anyone asked out loud. She learned the structure of his business the way she had learned accounting, methodically, layer by layer, storing everything in a mind that had always been significantly better at holding information than anyone who looked at her ever assumed. She was thorough, she was patient, and she was building a picture of something that was, she had to admit to herself in the most private part of her thinking, genuinely impressive in its architecture. Harder because she was falling and she knew it. She knew it the way you know something before you are ready to act on the knowledge. A low, constant awareness sitting at the back of everything, present in every room she was in with him, requiring active management to keep from reaching her face. He knew how she took her tea. She had not told him. He had simply paid attention over several weeks, and one evening it was just there, made correctly, placed without comment or ceremony at the corner of whatever surface she was working at. And she had to leave the room so he could not see what that did to her, because it was such a small thing, such a quietly devastating thing, and she had no system for managing small devastating things. She was falling for a man she was actively destroying. She was learning everything about a world with the specific intention of handing that knowledge to someone who wanted to burn it down. And every moment of genuine feeling that developed between them was not a complication in an operation. It was a wound she was opening wider every time she chose to stay. Then one evening Kaloru said something that made everything she had been managing irrelevant. "Your friend Mira says hello." He said it between sips, like it was weather, like it was a detail too small to require any particular framing. Cynthia went completely still. "She is comfortable here," Kaloru continued, looking at his glass rather than at her. "She will stay comfortable as long as you stay useful." Mira was in his house, not hurt. He was specific about that, and specific in a way that meant he understood the value of the distinction. Just there, just comfortable, just held in the particular way that requires no chains because the person being held does not know what they are being held for, and the doors stay unlocked because an open door in a house you cannot really leave is not a kindness. Mira did not know. Cynthia understood that immediately, with a certainty that went straight to her chest. Mira had been introduced to Kaloru through some chain of connection that would have looked entirely normal from where Mira was standing, probably through a business contact, probably framed as hospitality, probably with enough warmth and normalcy to make it feel like a stroke of good fortune. Because Mira always chose to believe the best version of a story. She always found the interpretation that required the least darkness. That was both her greatest quality and the precise vulnerability that someone like Kaloru would identify and use. Mira had not been taken because of something she had done. She had been taken because of something Cynthia was. And she was sitting in that house right now, probably comfortable, probably charmed, probably sending Cynthia texts that Cynthia was about to read and understand completely differently than Mira had written them. Something broke open in Cynthia's chest. Not dramatically, quietly, the way structural things break. Not with noise, but with a shift that changes everything that was resting on top of them. She smiled at Kaloru, steadily, evenly, without letting a single thing she was feeling travel from her chest to her face. "Understood," she said. And she went back to Kai's world, and she did her job. All the way. She stopped withholding information. She stopped managing the pace. She gave Kaloru what he needed because Mira was in that house, and there was no other calculation that mattered. No amount of money, no version of the dream on the wall, nothing that outweighed the woman who had sat on her floor and said that is how you know. She passed the safe. She did not slow down. But she found something, during those weeks, that Kaloru had not asked her to find and that she told no one about. Not Kaloru. Not anyone. She found it, and she recognized it, and she kept it the way you keep something that you do not yet know the full use of, but you know instinctively that the moment it is used, everything will change. She kept it. She said nothing. And she kept going. But wait. Because here is where it gets complicated in a way that will make you question everything you thought you understood about this story. Jean had contacted Mira before any of this. Weeks before Kaloru ever said her name in that room. Weeks before Cynthia had any idea that Mira was being positioned as a piece in a game she had not consented to play. Jean had studied Mira the way he studied everything, from a distance that looked like absence, quietly and completely, until he knew her well enough to know exactly where to apply pressure and exactly how much. He knew her financial situation, which was not catastrophic, but was the kind of persistent low-level strain that makes people vulnerable to offers that come at the right moment. He knew her patterns. He knew how she felt about the work Cynthia did, which was, beneath the loyalty and the lack of judgment, complicated in ways that Mira herself had probably never fully examined. He knew that her devotion to Cynthia was the most powerful thing about her, which meant it was also the most useful thing about her, if you could find the right way in. He waited for the way in. It came from somewhere Cynthia could never have predicted and will never fully forgive herself for, regardless of what comes next. There had been a night, 3 months before any of this, when Cynthia had done something she had no clean explanation for. A night when everything had felt too heavy and too close, and she had made a decision that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with a specific kind of self-destruction that visits people who are very good at holding things together when they get tired. She had slept with Myra's boyfriend. Once, a decision made in a bad hour that she buried in the deepest available place and intended to keep there for the rest of her life. Mira found out. She found out the way people always find out about the things they were never supposed to know. Not from the person who owed her the truth, but from the worst possible source at the worst possible moment, delivered without context or care, in the way that information delivered as a weapon always is. And the warmth between those two women, 10 years of it, Atlanta to Seoul, the floor and the food and the sketchbook, and that is how you know. It did not disappear. Warmth does not disappear overnight, even when it should. It curdled, which is so much worse than disappearing, because something curdled still carries the shape of what it used to be. You can see what it was. You know exactly what was lost. And that knowledge sits in your chest like a stone that you cannot put down and cannot carry. Jean called Mira within 48 hours of her finding out. She did not know how he knew. She would wonder about it later, in the months after, when she understood more of what had happened and what she had been used for. He was warm on the phone, patient. He listened to her for a long time before he said anything. He framed what he was asking her to do as justice, as Cynthia finally facing the consequences of choices she had made freely, as Mira finally having something of her own in a dynamic that had always cost her more than it cost Cynthia. He made it feel righteous. He made her feel, for the first time in weeks, like she was the one with power. He was offering her money and a direction for her grief and a story in which she was not a person being manipulated, but a person finally making a choice. She gave him everything. Cynthia's real role in Kaloru's operation, the timeline, every detail she had, and several she had assembled from the things Cynthia had let slip across months of carrying too many things alone. She handed it all over, and she told herself it was what Cynthia deserved. She told herself that every day. She needed to. But Jean had not called Mira to get her justice. He had called Mira because he needed a specific door opened at a specific moment, and she was the only key that fit. He had watched the friendship for months, had identified the exact fracture point, had waited for circumstances to create it, and then had walked through it with a precision that was almost surgical. He had weaponized her love. He had taken the best thing about her, her loyalty, her devotion, the 10 years of showing up, and he had turned it into the instrument of the destruction of the person she loved most. He saved his brother. He dismantled Kaloru's operation using what Mira provided, and Kaloru died in the fire of the resulting chaos. Not executed cleanly, just caught in a situation that had too many moving parts and too many interests colliding at once. Mira was released from the house, unaware of the full shape of what she had been part of, unaware that the door she had opened had not led where she thought it led. But Jean did not tell Kai everything immediately. He disclosed what was necessary and held back what was useful and controlled the order of revelation the way he controlled everything. Because information is only power when you decide when it is released and to whom. Kai found out about Cynthia on a Tuesday. She had been moving through his space that morning the way she moved through it every morning now. Familiar, purposeful, at ease in the way that takes months to earn and that she had earned without trying to, which was its own kind of problem. She was looking at something on his desk when he came into the room. He closed the door behind him. She knew immediately, not from his face, which was the same as it always was, still, controlled, giving nothing away for free. She knew from the specific quality of the silence that followed him into the room. The silence of a man who has learned something that has rearranged the entire structure of what he thought he was standing in. She had prepared for anger. She had rehearsed responses to anger, had mapped out the terrain of a confrontation that involved raised voices and shattered things, and the kind of heat that at least gives you something to push back against. She had prepared for that version of this moment for months, had kept it in the back of her mind as the eventual destination she was navigating toward. She had not prepared for quiet. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the very first morning, across the room in the dark, with the complete stillness of a man who already understands what he is looking at. But what he understood this time was different. What he understood this time was the full shape of what had happened in this room and in his life over the past months, who she was before she walked in, who had sent her, what she had been doing with everything he had given her access to. He did not ask her to explain. He did not accuse. He simply looked at her, and in his looking there was a question that had no language but was perfectly clear. She answered it before he could find the words. "I am just here for the money. You wanted love, and I gave it to you." She said it clearly. She said it the way you say something you have decided you are going to say regardless of what it does. Because the alternative, the truth, the full truth, the version in which she admitted what she had been feeling and what she had protected and what it had cost her to walk this line for this long, that version would not get her out of this room intact. And Mira, she believed at that moment, was still somewhere that required Cynthia to be intact. So she said it, and she watched what it did to his face. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not do any of the things she had prepared responses for. He just absorbed it, quietly and completely, the way he absorbed everything. And something in his expression shifted in a way that was so contained, so interior, that if she had not been studying his face for months, she would have missed it entirely. She did not miss it, and she knew, in the same breath as the words left her mouth, that she had been lying for a very long time. Not to him, to herself, for months, with extraordinary discipline and not a single moment of genuine success. She left. She walked out. Then she moved faster. Then she was running, and she let herself call it that because there was no one watching to see. Kaloru was dead. The promise of the business died with him. Mira had been released. She confirmed that through a contact 2 days later. But Mira did not know the shape of what she had been part of, did not know that her pain had been located and aimed and used by a man who had been building toward this for longer than either of them had been in soul. And Jean was moving inside the empire. His argument to the men around him was simple and not entirely wrong. His brother had trusted a woman who had been placed inside their world by an enemy, had given her access to everything, and was now, by Jin's account, too compromised to lead effectively. The empire needed steadier hands. Kai did not fight it. He was somewhere in the specific paralysis of a man who has lost something he never got around to naming properly, and the paralysis read, to the men watching, as confirmation of Jin's point. Jean put resources into finding Cynthia, publicly, to answer for what she had done, privately, because she was breathing and she knew things, and those two facts combined were a problem with only one solution in Jin's arithmetic. Cynthia was in a different city, a small apartment with a window that faced a wall, her sketchbooks on the desk, the post-it with the date still on it, almost nothing else. She was not running in panic. She never ran in panic. Panic was a luxury for people who did not need to think at the same time. She was thinking. Even with everything on fire around her, even with the specific weight of the look on Kai's face sitting in her chest like something that would not dissolve no matter how long she waited, she was thinking. And while she was thinking, she remembered what she had found. She had not found it for Kaloru. It was not part of any assignment. She had been deep in a section of Kai's financial records one evening, following a thread that led somewhere she had not expected, and she had found it the way you find things that were hidden carefully, not because you were looking, but because you were paying the kind of attention that hidden things cannot always survive. A ledger, not in any of the primary systems, buried through a sequence of structures that were almost invisible, routed through accounts that predated Kai's leadership by years, connected at the root to the founding documentation of the entire organization, connected, specifically, to their father, and to Jean. What Jean had built was not beside the empire or on top of it. It was underneath it, woven into the foundation in a way that meant Kai had been managing his father's legacy his entire life, without ever knowing that his brother had quietly claimed the most valuable parts of what that legacy produced. It was structured so that if you only ever looked at what was in front of you, at what had been handed to you, at what bore your name on the official documents, you would never see it. You would run the empire and believe you owned it, and every year a portion of what you built would route quietly away from you through channels that Jean had constructed before Kai ever sat at the head of anything. She had found it. She had understood it completely. And she had said nothing. Not to Kaloru, who would have used it as a weapon against Kai rather than a gift for him. Not to anyone. She had held it, without a plan, without knowing why, only knowing that using it felt wrong in a way she could not talk herself out of. She sat in the dark of that small apartment with the sketchbooks open in front of her and the date on the post-it unchanged, and she made a decision that was either very smart or very dangerous, or, most likely, both of those things at once. She picked up a phone that could not be traced back to her. She typed. Kai's phone lit up on the table beside him. Unknown number. He read the message once. Then again. Then a third time, slowly. The way you read something that is reorganizing everything you thought you understood about the last several months. Protect me from your brother. I will give you the ledger he buried under your father's name. It will make you number one. He set the phone down. Jin's voice came through the wall from the next room. Low, measured. The voice of a man who was entirely comfortable in a space he had recently taken over. The voice of a man who believed that what came next was already decided. Kai thought about the shell company she had found and told him about when she could have said nothing. He thought about the way she had shown him the numbers without drama, without using them for anything, without asking for anything in return. He thought about the fact that she had found this, whatever this ledger was, while she was inside everything, while she had every reason and every opportunity to use it against him, and she had not. She had held it. And now, from a city he did not know, running from his brother's resources, she was offering it to him. Not as a confession, not as an apology, as a negotiation, which meant she understood him, still, well enough to know that a negotiation was the one language he would always show up for, regardless of everything that had happened between them. She had learned him that well. She had learned him, and she had held this, and she had protected it, and she had run with it rather than sell it. And he did not know what to do with all of that yet, but he knew one thing. He picked up the phone. He typed one word. Where? And that is where we stop. For now. Because what happens when those two people are in the same room again? What Kai does when he sees her, what she asks for in return, what Jin does the moment he realizes what his brother now knows, whether the ledger is everything she says it is, and whether what grew between them across all those months can survive what was done with it. That is a story that deserves its own chapter entirely, and we are going to tell it. But that is part 2. If you made it to the end of this video, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Right now, before you do anything else, drop a comment and tell me, do you think Cynthia was ever really in love, or was she performing it until the very end? Because I have a feeling this comment section is going to be divided, and I genuinely want to know where you stand. Like this video, so that more people can find this story, because a story this good deserves an audience. And if you have not subscribed to Stories from Seoul yet, do it right now, because part 2 is coming and I promise you, you are not ready for what happens when that door opens. We will see you in Seoul.